I just want to say welcome, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time out. I think it just says so much that you're willing to allocate the time to learn more about your child's learning process and what all goes into it at every level. My name is Dr. Janissa Jackson. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in practice, just hit my 20-year milestone. So that was a big event for me. Most of my career, I've specialized in diagnostic testing. So that's pretty intense and in-depth, hours long of testing to determine a diagnosis. And while that is powerful and rewarding, I felt the need to further provide sources for enrichment following a diagnosis. Because so often the question is, then what? Luckily, I came across LearningRx from someone from out of state that introduced me to LearningRx and was really blown away by the research. And I think that's why more professionals are now partnering with LearningRx because of the research that goes into this program. And it's just exciting to now be a part of it. I now own two LearningRx centers, and I have another one on the way in addition to my clinical practice. I'm coming to you from my clinic this evening. So I work in multiple places. I've worked with homeschool families for years, and my impression of homeschool parents is they are incredibly motivated, incredibly creative, and willing to go the distance to really find that key to unlock their child's learning. And that's why I'm excited to be a part of this group, because it's almost like preaching to the choir. But sometimes the choir needs refinement. Sometimes you still have questions and you find these roadblocks. And I'm hoping through this webinar, maybe we can unlock and see what's underneath some of those learning struggles, or what might be lurking there, that wall that you're coming up against. So I've got a presentation shared. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. This slide, essentially shows a brick wall, because sometimes no matter how creative, how motivated, how excited you are about the homeschool journey, you find yourself hitting a wall and with your child. And I want to say that most kids start out in life excited about learning. And I think we can all, remember when our children were young, or super young, or maybe they're young now and they're excited and they want to go grab a book and they want to sit in your lap and they want to learn. And then they go through that phase where they ask a million questions, and just that curiosity is so beautiful to see in our kids. But sometimes in some kids, you start hitting a wall. And I use my hands because it just feels so discouraging. And what happens is when something gets to be difficult for a child, then they start avoiding it. And they start letting you know that they're avoiding it. And whether that's oh, I'm done, or I think I figured it out, or I want to go outside, or I want to do something else. And then this wall towards learning starts building. And what kids do when they hit that wall, and there's lots of different ones, and we're going to talk about maybe what's underneath or the source of these struggles, is they start making their world smaller. They want to do the minimum. And as a homeschool parent, when your job is to get this child prepped and ready for life and learn all the most important things, when they're trying to do the minimum, that's going to hit on your fear structure. That's going to hit on your anxiety of, oh goodness, I got to go back in there. I got to go to battle. We got to get this learned. We got to do this. And then homeschooling can become a lot less fun, a lot less creative, just feeling like you're trying to get through the day. So I want to speak to what may be at the source of those frustrations. And I want to be very, very clear. It is not because you're not trying hard enough. It's not because you haven't found the curriculum. We're going to talk about an overlooked layer of skills that absolutely lends itself towards the ability, the capacity, and the attitude towards learning. So this is an area that is really overlooked across the board. So I'm hoping tonight you're going to feel encouraged and you're going to feel hopeful that there's an area of your child's learning and your child's development that you can learn more about to give you skills to move forward. So we're going to get to the source of the struggle this evening in the webinar. All right, let me go ahead and move. This is a brilliant pyramid that Rebecca Grow helped me put together to really show you the layers of learning skills. So we're going to go through each of these, but this kind of puts it in an order that makes sense. So at the very foundation, we're going to talk about development. Developmental skills, these are, physical development, mental development. They're at the bottom of the pyramid. Then we're going to talk about cognitive skills. And this is where LearningRx specializes. This is that whole layer of the learning pyramid that has been largely unknown prior to the research that's come to the surface. And now we know how we can improve these particular skills. We knew about them. We just originally, scientists thought these things were kind of fixed and you just had to work with what you had. Then we're going to talk about there's also executive functioning skills. That's kind of an outpouring of the developmental and cognitive skills. And then academic behavior. So all of these areas are important. We're going to be highlighting the cognitive skills this evening because that is typically at the source of most learning struggles. And again, like I said, it's just been overlooked and kind of an unknown entity. So developmental skills, in my clinic here, we start seeing kids at 12 months. This is where there are clear developmental problems and parents are seeking out early intervention, early speech therapy. If a child is not speaking, then it triggers a need of, okay, we've got to go to the pediatrician. We need to see what we're doing. These are usually very obvious delays, whether it's in sensory motor, physical delays, as a child walking. So at the very foundation, these are developmental skills that typically receive intervention because it's a very clear roadblock. It's not an invisible wall that you're hitting. It's a visible thing that parents can see, they can experience. Is your child able to hear? There are some focus skills that are developmental. Can they focus on a light early on? Are they looking at your face? Coordination, visual development. We're quick to get our children glasses, hearing aids, speech therapy, even the senses and kind of that sensory motor integration. This is like an occupational therapy area. So at the very base of our pyramid are these developmental skills. If a child struggles with hearing, then that's an area we need to address first, right? We want to get those hearing aids. We want to get glasses. We want to make sure that we're handling the physical, mental, and cognitive developmental skills at the base level. So if you have a young child, 0 to 2, and you're seeing any areas of concern in 2 to 4, you want to see your pediatrician about those developmental skills because those are definitely a baseline for learning. So when we reach past the development, then we move into cognitive skills. Now, I'm going to brush by this slide to talk about the other areas, but I assure you that we're going to come back and we're going to learn all about the way our child's brain develops and what those cognitive skills mean and what it feels like and what it looks like when those are a problem. When there is a weak point here, I want you to know what it looks like and what it feels like to be in the moment with that child. So we're going to come back. We have attention, working memory, processing speed. You can see them listed out here, and I assure you we're going to go through those. I want to hit on these other areas so that you know what cognitive skills are not. So executive functioning is a buzz phrase. You're going to hear that everywhere these days. And a lot of people use that phrase, but I don't know that they have a deep understanding of what it means, and some of them probably do. But executive functioning skills are an outpouring of cognitive skills. It's kind of like being able, like if the cognitive skills are the instruments in the orchestra, the executive functioning is the conductor. So it's the ability to manage multiple cognitive skills to have an output, like time management. That's where you start seeing a problem. Okay, my child is not getting things done on time. There is a concept called time blindness. So this is where if you're seeing it, it likely points to an underlying cognitive skill issue. These are very complex skills that require management of lots of areas of the brain. Task initiation. Do they do something? Do they take initiative and go do it on their own? See a need and go do it? Well, that's a very complicated skill, requires a strong cognitive base in the brain, strong cognitive skills in a lot of areas. Emotional regulation. Are they able to manage their emotions? Are they getting frustrated? My question is, why? What's underneath that? If they're not managing their time, why? If they're not doing things on their own, why? It's not just repetition of these skills that gets things better. We have to go underneath it. Are they monitoring their own behavior? Are they organized? Well, if they're not, then why? What's underneath that? So these are outputs of cognitive skills. You have to be strong in your brain to be able to do these particular skills. But these become red flags to parents. They're seeing that, kind of like if they're seeing if their child isn't speaking correctly. Well, now they're seeing that they're not getting things done. They're not understanding that this is going to take longer than 5 minutes. So those are executive functioning skills. Complex combinations of cognitive skills. That's a tongue twister right there. That's a lot to say at once. All right, let me show you this. Academic and behavioral output. This is where parents feel they're hitting the wall. I have gone over this reading assignment 3 times. Why is this still difficult? Why are you struggling to put things into words? Test taking. Being in a homeschool environment, you can make a lot of creative accommodations. I will say it's the most individualized education you can get, but sometimes you still hit those barriers. Well, if I'm making all these accommodations and doing it to your giftedness, why are you still struggling with this assignment? What's the source of the struggle here? I need you to be able to do some independent work. Okay, I need to be able to walk away and help your sister, and I need you to be able to do the work. So these are the points of frustration so often because these are measurable. How is your reading? How is your writing? Are you able to show off what you know on a test, or do you kind of fall apart at that point? Can you work on your own? And we need our kids to work on their own as they get older. Social skills. Are you able to get along with your siblings and then translate that into a social environment, maybe a co-op environment? Can you take turns? Do you blurt out? How are you able to speak? Are you able to communicate well about your emotions, your needs, and your preferences? Can you hold a conversation? So this is at the top of that pyramid. The problem often is we address the wrong level of the pyramid. Okay, we're intervening at the wrong place. So let me show you this. Another beautiful graph here. I did not create, going to give Rebecca credit on this, but think of it like a stair step. I want you to look at that top step there. It says academics and behavior. If you are intervening there and there is difficulty down here at cognitive skills, then you're not going to get the results. You're working so hard, but when you have a broken or weak infrastructure down here, you can work here and work here and work here, and you keep hitting the barriers. Maybe you're working here. You're working on time management. Okay, I'm going to set a timer. I need you to get this done. And then it still doesn't get done. And you think, gosh, this is so frustrating. These are all important things to address. But we've got to get down to the heart of the matter to see the most powerful results. You get the most return on your investment when you're working at the right level, when you're working at the source of the struggle. And that's the beautiful thing about LearningRx is they're going to get to the source of the struggle so that these things become easier by default when you work on the brain skills that go into these tasks and these outputs. So I'm going to go on to this next slide. And these are things that we hear at LearningRx. And I want you to consider as a parent, have you ever felt this? Does this ring a bell? These are the things that we take very seriously at LearningRx because we want to help. So she knows the material while we're going over it, but when it's time to get by herself and do the work and recall it later, she's blank. So that's frustrating, right? You've spent the time, you've invested, you've talked all about the material, and then you send her off to do the work and she doesn't recall it. And she comes back and says, I don't know what to do. I need you to help me with this. Another thing, I have to sit right next to him the entire time or nothing gets done. You have so many demands on you as a homeschool parent, and particularly if you're homeschooling more than one child, and you want to be able to invest in each of your kids. And if you just have one, I shouldn't say just, that's a high feat just in one. You also have other demands too, like I have to answer the phone, or there's all kinds of demands on your time. So also, you need a child to be able to work independently because that's a really important skill. They are going to go into life. They have to be able to manage themselves and get things done. This next one I hear all the time. He takes forever to finish assignments or tasks. Something that should take 20 minutes is taking all day. That is one of the biggest frustrations of homeschool parents because it creates this strong avoidance. And then they're digging in and I'm never going to get it done. And kind of this gloom and doom of I can't do this assignment. It's too hard. I can't get it done. And then there's the tears start rolling. And it feels like a hopeless situation. And the problem is that same assignment's going to come up tomorrow or something that hits on that same skill. So that's one that gets really overwhelming to families. Here's another one. She can tell me a whole story out loud, but if I ask her to write it down, there's a freeze up. She goes blank, she's stuck, she looks at the paper. And so what should be a fun process of sharing your story becomes a shutting down. And let me just add in here that writing takes so much mental energy, and your cognitive skills have to really all be firing well to write something. It hits on so many different parts of the brain. He forgets instructions partway through and repeatedly asks, "What am I supposed to do?" It's easy to get frustrated. I think that we have to figure out what we're frustrated at. A lot of times it's natural to get frustrated with your kid and think, are you just not trying? Do you not care that I'm giving my heart and soul to educate you and my life and my time? And I mean, those are normal feelings that come up when you hit against the same wall and you've done everything you know to get over that hurdle and it keeps hitting. There's some more on this page. She struggles to sound out new words and read fluently. Reading is one of those things that gives parents the most fear. If your child is struggling to read, that's a scary thing, because one of the phrases I often use is that if reading is hard, everything is hard. If reading is hard, life is hard. And that's an area that can be so stressful for parents. And they'll go over it and over it and over it. And they start getting tutors and anything they can do, because this is a fearful process. He gets so frustrated and shuts down the minute something feels hard. And then it turns into tears and arguments. Absolutely. Sometimes really bright kids don't, when they start to feel they're getting something wrong, they can shut down. Or perhaps they have cognitive struggles, and when it hits on that one area of the brain, they're going to shut down and they're going to run away. That's called fight or flight, right? I mean, they're either going to cry and beg you not to do it and fight through it or fight against it, or they're going to shut down and cry and move away from it, even if it's just they're sitting there, but they're shut down. They're no longer participating or engaging in the task. This is not what you had in mind when you had the idea of homeschooling. I know that you had a vision of, I want to raise my child up to their calling. I want to prepare them for life. I want to be the one. I want to watch the light bulbs come on with my child. And that is so painful when what you see are roadblocks. And what I want you to hear as we go through these cognitive skills, again, let me emphasize, you're not doing it wrong. If you're having these kind of roadblocks, these point to underlying cognitive skills that are weak. And I want you to know that we can take a careful look at it. You can learn what is strong and what is weak in your child. It would be unfortunate to assume it's the wrong curriculum or you're the wrong person to be teaching your child. These are skills that dramatically impact the ability to learn. So I want you to stay tuned. I want you to know that we are here to partner with you, and you can learn about what's underneath learning that can make it so much more rewarding. A couple more on here. She'll read a paragraph beautifully and then have no idea what she's read. That is something that children and adults alike struggle with and report that to me so often. I feel like we spend more time redirecting and battling distractions than actual learning. Yes. And no matter how many times we go over the same math facts, they just won't stick. I will tell you, there is a picture of my family in Branson, Missouri on vacation. And you will see, this is from probably 10 years ago with my son, you will see a set of math flashcards sitting out on the coffee table in our family vacation photo, because I was still trying. I was still here. We were on vacation, but I thought, my goodness, we're bringing the math facts with us. But you know what? That repetition did not work. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I could not teach my child math facts because he had weak visualization systems in his brain. Now, I will say he did LearningRx later, and we finally, while he was in high school, grabbed onto those math facts. But I did not find that through repetition, no matter how much I wanted it for my kid. All right, so I'm going to talk about our model at LearningRx, and I want you to feel and experience the hope that comes along with getting to the source of the struggle. So when you look at this diagram here, I want you to focus first on the file cabinet. The file cabinet represents your child's brain. And the knowledge bank down here, this is where you, as the teacher of your child, are putting information, you are providing information. The curriculum you have researched and chosen, you are putting information in this file cabinet. then you're not getting consistent output. Okay. The reason for that is a lot of times this file cabinet representing the brain is not organized well. And it's really not anyone's fault. Sometimes these things are genetic, but they're what underlie learning. So at LearningRx, we're not a tutoring center. There's nothing wrong with tutoring. That's not what we do. We don't reteach or repeat information because we work underneath here. We work on the brain's capacity to both encode and retrieve that information effectively. So I'm going to go through this model and then we're going to break it down even further because I want you to know what these skills sound like, what they feel like when they're a weak point in the brain. So I want to really bring this to life for you. At the lowest level of processing, automatic processing, we have these three skills in blue: attention, working memory, and processing speed. And when it says automatic, it shouldn't be in conscious awareness. The reason these things we become aware, oh, my child is not paying attention or they're not remembering, is when there's a problem. If there's not a problem, these aren't things we think about. We don't think about how quickly we complete a task unless it's taking all day for our child to complete a task. Then we're talking about processing speed, right? We're ready to talk about that. So these are the lowest level of processing here. And a lot of times information falls out here at the gate. If it gets past here, we get to higher level thinking and learning, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. And that includes logic and reasoning, auditory processing, visual processing, and long-term memory. And when these things are a problem, it limits what's put into the file cabinet, right? It limits what's put into the brain. And we're going to be talking about those pieces of the puzzle. But I will tell you, if there is a breakdown in any cognitive skill, then you're not going to get consistent output, even with the most highly motivated parent on their best day with the best curriculum, the best learning environment, all of the things, because this is what underlies the capacity for learning. These are the skills. So instead of talking through each of these skills with our model represented, I'm going to break them down further. And we can come back to this if you have questions. But remember, when you see this model, we have automatic processing here, and then we have higher thinking. So I'm going to go ahead and move to this slide. Let's talk about automatic processing. Let's go with attention. The human attention span is now down to 8 seconds, which is a travesty. The goldfish attention span is 9 seconds. So that tells you where we're at in our culture. This has been heavily impacted by technology. So people have no patience and no attention span. It's actually, I've done some research in preparing for this webinar. It's decreased 30%. The attention span of the human race has decreased 30% in the last 20 years. And I know that a lot of parents, you really work to limit technology and you want to limit the impact here. But the truth of it is, a lot of kids struggle with attention. There's different types of attention. There's directed attention, there's sustained attention, divided attention. So there's lots of ways of describing it. But essentially, when you're having to redirect your child to your face, to the book, look at me, this is what I want to work on, that means attention may be an issue. You may have a struggle there. And having to redirect throughout a lesson is not typical. Now, if you've got their favorite video playing in the background, yes, okay, we know that's going to be distracting. But if you are focused on learning, that should be something that they should sustain that attention for. I want to talk to you also about working memory. This is short-term memory. This is both auditory short-term memory and visual short-term memory. Auditory is, what did I just say? This is not a memory for the vacation last year, right? I have parents that say, well, there's nothing wrong with my child's memory. They can tell me exactly how to get to the grocery store. They know everything that happened when they were 4 years old and all of that, but that's already in long-term memory. And you can have a fabulous long-term memory and a very weak short-term memory. So both auditory and visual. Auditory short-term memory is memory for what you hear. Visual short-term memory is memory for what you see. And, while you experience frustration of, hey, I just told you to go put your shoes away, or you don't have any confidence that your child can go get your assignment, bring your assignment in here, and also put your shoes on the way in here. If you don't believe your child can follow those multi-step directions and you don't have confidence in that, they likely have a short-term memory issue. And let me just speak to the children that are represented by the families here. This erodes a child's confidence quicker than anything. If you have to say, what did I just say? What did I just tell you to do? That child feels some shame. They feel like, gosh, I don't know. I don't know. And then they start building that wall. Maybe I'm not smart. Maybe I can't. I don't know. What did you just say? And then guess what? That kid ends up in trouble all the time because they're not following directions. That's understandable. You provide consequences when a child doesn't follow directions. My question is why? Why are they not? And sometimes maybe they really don't want to, right? Any child can get there. I can get there sometimes. Maybe I really don't want to do that. But a lot of the times, if they don't remember, maybe they even pass it off like they don't want to because they're embarrassed that they don't remember. This is a very serious issue. And I will tell you, LearningRx addresses short-term memory issues better than any program I've seen. This gives hope to kids when they can remember what you just said. They can remember what you're teaching them and they can carry it on. They can build on it for the next day. This is so beautiful when we can rebuild the memory in the brain. So I want to talk next about processing speed. For years in my clinic, I watched kids with low processing speed get more and more depressed over the years. And there's actually research studies outlining this. Low processing speed leads to increased depression and anxiety because the issue is the older you get, the more you have to balance, the more you have to manage. Life does not get easier the older you get, in my experience. There's more. There's driving, there's a job, there's managing all kinds of things into adulthood. So processing speed is crucial here because typically there's more. The volume of work increases and these kids start to shrink back because they just can't get it done. So processing speed looks like it taking way longer to complete a simple task than it should. And you're looking at this kid and you think, gosh, I know you're bright. Why can you not get this done? I really don't want to write sentences all day with you. What else could we be doing? There's the frustration that comes out here. And I will tell you, processing speed is rarely impacted by medications. So this becomes an issue, even if there's an ADHD diagnosis and maybe you've sought treatment medically in that way, it just doesn't get better. And so processing speed follows people into adulthood, and it means they don't get the job done. This is a big one, and this is a major pain point of dining room tables, of sitting there in the struggle and the difficulty and not knowing how to make it quicker for your kid. So this is a big one. So attention, working memory, and processing speed. Let's move forward and talk about higher thinking. Higher thinking, we have logic and reasoning. So this is the ability to strategize, to draw conclusions. If this, then this. This requires confidence. Kids that struggle here will say, well, what do I do now? What do I do now? I don't know what to do. Or they're just impulsive. They're picking something. I don't know. Let's go with this strategy. They struggle to really dig deep and to analyze the information and come up with a strategy to solve something. So that's what logic and reasoning looks like. If that is a weak point, then you're going to see it in working independently, in strategizing, in solving and challenging themselves to solve harder problems. They're going to want someone to spoon feed it to them. That's a big one. And that also becomes very important as teenagers. You want your teenagers to have very strong logic and reasoning skills. You want them to really hesitate and think and strategize before they make decisions with the more freedom they have. So that's not only a cognitive skill, that's a life skill. Let's talk about auditory processing. Auditory processing is the brain's ability to recognize and interpret and make sense of sounds. It's not hearing, but it's what is the brain processing as part of that puzzle. A lot of times kids can hear something, but only process bits and pieces of it. So that leads to some stress and frustration, and it's a building block for reading skills. So it underlies conditions like dyslexia and autism sometimes, the ability to process the sounds in the room. And it's a lot of times parents will say, I feel like my kid isn't, they're not really present. Like they're here, but they're not here. And sometimes that's an auditory processing. They're just, their brain is trying to catch up with everything that you're sharing with them and managing all the sounds in the room. Visual processing. This is an area that underlies mathematics. So it's spatial relationships. It's the ability for the brain to process what you see visually. And I think people really underestimate how much that's involved in math. We think math is about repetition. Just do it. Just do it. But I want you to imagine a number line with me. Like 10 minus 3 is 7. If you can't see that, then those are words to be memorized. And that's very hard to build a system of numerical system in the brain and visual spatial relationships if you can't see those things internally and manipulate that information. That's oftentimes, excuse me, why math becomes a problem early. And then kids are like, yeah, I don't like math. Math's hard. So they avoid it. They have lower confidence, and then that's how it rolls out over time. Long-term memory is the ability to remember things from long ago. And I will say this about long-term memory. We don't measure that on the front end at LearningRx, but it's something we have research to show that it gains over time. Long-term memory, if it's not put in there, it's not going to be there. So we want to shore up all the short-term memory, all the other cognitive skills. So we're packing the most information in that long-term memory so that they can build on that skill tomorrow. So those are the essential cognitive skills. I want to show you a picture. This is a little girl. I'm going to call her Sweet E. She is 9 years old, and her parents decided to bring her in for an assessment at LearningRx. So this is what you get to see. You come in for an assessment. We don't just talk about these things, we measure them. And so you're going to have some light bulbs yourself of, oh, that's why my child does A, B, C, and D, because, we could strategize and think, well, you're telling me your child does this, it may be this kind of issue. But honestly, I'd prefer we measure it. Let's take a look at it. Let's really see, because I don't want to miss something with your child. That's why we have this incredible measurement at LearningRx called the Gibson test. And I'm a psychologist, and I have to tell you, it's an excellent test. I give tests for a living, and this is a good one. So let me tell you about Sweet E. Sweet E is a very nervous little girl. Her father is a physician, and her mother educates her and takes on the brunt of the education. And that mom is very scared. Her daughter is years behind. She's been given both an ADHD and a dyslexia diagnosis. So those are diagnoses that she's been living with. She is on a stimulant medication in this first graph. And these are where her cognitive skills measured. Now we've kind of talked through what these are. So her working memory here is a combination statistically of auditory and visual memory. Okay, so those are the things that we've measured, and this is where this score comes from. Now let me say this about this graph. This middle line right here is average. Okay, this is middle of the road. This is average. Above this line would be above average, and below the line is below average. So we can see our sweet E is struggling. She has a lot of cognitive weaknesses here that underlie her capacity for learning. And her parents have tried lots of things. So her auditory memory is at the 1. Her mom can sit with her days on end, and she is not retaining a lot of the information that her mom is so carefully providing to her. In a traditional classroom, we estimate 80% of instruction is auditory. Even in a homeschool environment where you can have lots of bright visuals and you can be creative, you're still needing to share information verbally with your child. And if this is a weak point, that's a huge barrier. That is the brick wall that this family was hitting against, but it wasn't just one wall. She's got more walls that we're talking about. Her visual memory is approaching average, but still below. She's not able to rely on that to make up for things. Her visual processing, this underlies mathematics, is at the 8th percentile. She's years behind in math. Very low confidence here. Her logic and reasoning, she is mentally tired. She's afraid to strategize, and she's just not sure what solution to pick when we try to measure her logic and reasoning. Her processing speed is another barrier. She's slower to get things done. And when you're behind and then you're slower to get things done, it just is a compounding effect for her. Now, I want to speak to her auditory processing. That's hitting at the average level. She's been in 3 years of dyslexia tutoring at this point. 3 years. She is still not reading at an age-appropriate level, but her auditory processing is improved. The reason it's taken 3 years is because of this right here. She's had to have it repeated over and over and over again. It's not that this intervention is bad, it's just she doesn't have the brain skills to grab onto it. And so one thing I say in my practice is kids spend years in interventions that they don't remember. And I have a real burden about that because childhood is sacred. We want to get to the source of the struggle so they can learn quicker, faster, easier. We want to close that gap so that they can enjoy the process of learning and do lots of different things with their time. This word attack is not a cognitive skill we discussed. That's a measurement we do at LearningRx that sees how well a child can read words that are nonsense words they've never seen. So it's kind of how do they put the whole system together for reading? So even after 3 years, she's not able to really put that together. She's not able to read unfamiliar words. This attention composite, we talked about attention, is a combination of processing speed, visual short-term memory, and auditory short-term memory. That's because those are the scores most closely associated with attention concerns. So I will tell you, her dad was skeptical. He's a physician, and I guess somewhere online he found a negative review about LearningRx somewhere in the country. And you know what the mom said to him? I think you have a negative review somewhere. We know in the land of technology, people can write anything, but I will tell you, I encourage you to look into the research of this program. And luckily, that's what that family decided to lean on the research. Now, there's wonderful glowing reviews about LearningRx out there, but the research is why I'm here. So let me show you the next slide. This is where Sweet E finished our program. And, I say at LearningRx, we don't cure things, but wow, she is in such a different capacity for learning. Now, her auditory memory, I will tell you, this is a stubborn score, and she may do some future brush up of this particular skill. But I will tell you, she was no longer taking her stimulant medication at the end of our program. And that's not something, and we stay in our lane. That's a private decision for families. But you're going to see all of these scores are now in the above average range. And that's beautiful, right? That's a beautiful change. She has a totally different attitude towards learning now. She's excited about learning. One of the outputs we see of this is she starred in a play last year. This was a scared kid that was trying to minimize any challenges in her life, who is now, not only did she learn her lines, she knew the lines of the other characters because she might need to help them out. The confidence in her is life altering. And what's beautiful about LearningRx is we have research showing a year later, we have a 97% retention of these gains. And I can speak to Sweet E. She's been back and her scores were phenomenal. And she's just continuing to live a different life because she has a different relationship with learning. We've helped her overcome those walls, those brick walls that, with the best intention, her and her family were hitting against, so that she can enjoy the challenges coming her way and even seek them out, which is such a different approach. So that's the end of my part, but we want to take some questions and answers from anyone. Rebecca, I'm going to let you field those and let me know what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So first one, can you speak a little bit to the neuroplasticity that's involved with this brain training? We had someone chime in to say that 3 of her kids have gone through vision therapy and it made a huge difference with a daughter who couldn't read after first grade. She's in high school now and doing great. Her brothers read well, but take forever to do work. So
Yes.
how does neuroplasticity work into this?
Yes, neuroplasticity is a very big, complicated word that I had to practice many times to be able to say correctly because it just gets stuck. But I want to say this about it. It is the most hopeful process that you can imagine. For years in psychology, we thought the brain was stuck. If something was hard, it would always be hard. What neuroplasticity means is that we build neurons. Neurons can grow and develop. So if your child's brain is not wired together efficiently, we can improve the efficient wiring of that brain. And when you build neurons, results last. It's not a quick fix that, oh, they get through this, we cram it, cram it, cram it, then they pass a test and then they're done. Well, if that were what we were doing, they would not pass that test a year later. We're not doing that at LearningRx. We're building the brain, we're strengthening the brain. There's imaging studies that go along with this. Like there's still research being conducted to understand just how powerful this neuroplasticity is. But that's the reason that I'm here, is that this is not a repetition program. This is a neuroplasticity program.
One of the questions that was submitted when people registered was that the parents in the family have ADHD and they suspect that the children do too. Can you talk a little bit about the cognitive side of those family struggles?
Yes, I can speak to this both as a doctor and a parent of a child with ADHD. My daughter lets me speak about her, but when you've lived with ADHD close up, it can be a very painful process. I mean, there's a lot of struggles that other people don't see and they don't understand. But with ADHD, we see issues with attention, short-term memory, remembering. I just remember the anxiety of feeling like I know I told my daughter that, but I don't have, I'm going to have to remind her later. I'm going to have to come back to it. I'm going to have to come back to it. And the stress that added, or we're late every morning and I don't want to be late and it's very stressful to be late. So those things about the efficiency of the brain, processing speed, sometimes it's not that it takes them forever to do something. It's that there's 100 lanes of traffic moving in the brain all at once. And just getting them to focus on that one task, their brain's moving 100 miles an hour. It's just in the wrong directions. So those are feelings that with the ADHD component, that really can make life challenging. And let me say that there's hope. And you don't have to have a diagnosis to come to LearningRx. If you just suspect these struggles, that's the beautiful thing here. there's really not a hurdle to getting in there and having the brain assessed. You just have to call and make that decision. You don't need a referral. There's no real hoops to jump through. And what a beautiful baseline to see how the brain is doing. I will tell you, I wish every person, I have a 6-month wait at my clinical practice for diagnostic assessments. I wish every one of those people that are waiting would come into LearningRx and learn something today. Learn something that can change this school year and not have to wait that long to get the first part of an answer. And LearningRx is not only learning about the brain, it's a solution. There's things you can do now to start improving upon those attention skills.
Awesome. All right. From Michelle, how is LearningRx training different from vision therapy?
That's a great question. We have a vision therapy clinic here in the city where I'm from, and I've worked with that physician for years, that optometrist. Um, Vision therapy is different in that it's highly localized to the visual field. So it's going to be focused there and it's going to go deeper in vision therapy. Vision therapy is not bad. It's just different. So imagine taking one area of the brain there, the visual processing, and going way deeper in that one pocket. But the concern is if there's other areas of weak points in the brain, vision therapy does not address that. So the nice thing about LearningRx as a baseline, it's a whole brain. It's a whole brain focus, and it's going to open up pathways. Your child may need vision therapy at a later point, but it might be nice to start with LearningRx to look at all the cognitive skills. Unless the vision is the biggest struggle in the beginning, then you may start there. So we can work in partnership. It's not really one or the other. Vision therapy is just doing a deep dive in that particular cognitive skill.
Janissa, can I add something there on
Yes.
the vision therapy? I'm Dargan and I'm with LearningRx in Charlottesville, Virginia. And if children have an ocular motor issue, they don't track, they can't fixate, it does impair the ability to measure some cognitive skills. So that would be a case where a vision therapy may be a good frontline intervention. And once the tracking or the fixation issues, the ocular motor issues are addressed, then you can get accurate baselining on the cognitive and they're able to be tracking because the eyes, from a motor perspective, are not limiting their performance.
Yes, that's a great point. And I like how you brought in some of the specific skills that they're going to be working on a physical level with the vision therapy.
Right. We've got another question here. You spoke about how your children were a bit older. That's where we are now. Do you feel that this is still worthwhile? I have 3 children, ages 14, 16, and 18. The scary part is the cost of something like this times 3. I don't work full time because I homeschool.
Absolutely. Let me speak to that because I made both of my children go through the program, so I can speak to that. It's so much better. The earlier, the better. Where I see the struggle is adults coming to me in my clinical practice and they're losing a job or they didn't get the promotion and they're battling these weak cognitive skills and trying to work around them because there wasn't a point to address them. And addressing them in adulthood is difficult. We can do it absolutely, and we do it every day at LearningRx. But having them at the teenage level is so much easier to do it then. My children, my daughter, I can share her story just briefly. I'll try to be short because you know you could talk about your kids forever. But she is one of the reasons that I was looking for better interventions. We had tried all the things for her ADHD and, you know, she was getting by, but she wasn't thriving. There's a difference. And I know in order to make it in life, it's a whole lot better if you're thriving. You don't want your kid kind of hanging on and trying to get through life. It's hard to fulfill their purpose. And I knew she was going to do some good things, but I wanted her to enjoy it more. I knew that good things were going to happen. So I actually brought her home from college and did an 8-month program of brain training with her. And she was willing. And she did it. And we did online college, which nobody wants to pay for that, but I did because I believe in this program. And she called me a year ago this month. After she completed it, she went back for her senior year at a university and she called me. She said, Mom, something's different this semester. And you know me, I'm all ears, like, okay, I've invested a lot. We did all this brain training, you know. And she said, usually I'm really good at one college class and I don't know what's going on in the others. I'm hoping. My brain's in chaos. I have no idea. Am I ahead? Am I behind? She said, but for the first time, I'm good at all of them. And she said, I went ahead and mapped out my entire semester. And I have all this free time because I know what I need to do each day. And I don't really know what to do with all this free time. And she said, do you think it might be that LearningRx thing you made me do? And I said, yes, it's the LearningRx thing. She took 21 hours that semester and made the dean's list. So it was beautiful because I saw my kid thriving. Let me reverse that. She took 18 hours, not 21. That I don't know where that came from. No, in my grand scheme, I was thinking, no, 18 hours made the dean's list. My son wasn't planning on going to college. And it's okay. I'm all about trades. I mean, you fulfill your calling. You follow your path, and I want you to be passionate about it. He tried a trade and he didn't like it. And then he got really scared because then he thought, oh gosh, I have to go to college. Well, I put him in some brain training because he had a lot of avoidance built up of learning. He didn't have a diagnosis, he just had avoidance built up. And he did brain training. And not only did he go to college, he got a partial academic scholarship because he was feeling that confidence and it was showing in his work. And I have to tell you, he did our Study RX program this summer that he wasn't wild about. He took his first exam at a major university and got a 100. And he studied so hard for that, but he had the skills to do it and the cognitive baseline. And he got a 70 on a later test. Okay. He didn't get 100 on every test, but what that did for his confidence was huge. So absolutely it's worth the investment. I would say have your kids do an assessment and you may need to prioritize which one. And that professional that goes over those assessments will help you say, I think we should start here if you need help making that decision, because that's always difficult.
I think we'll do one more question here. Somebody asked a question about the skills for students with autism or who are neurodivergent. Can you talk a little bit about how brain training works for those students?
There are some benefits of brain training. So I specialize in autism at my clinical practice, and a lot of my own patients have gone through brain training, just in learning about the program through me. One of the most powerful skills I see with autism spectrum kids is auditory processing. You know, a lot of times I've been learning through an audiologist we have that works for LearningRx about some of the difficulties with understanding tone and sound. And I've had a particular kid that was weak in auditory processing that when we strengthened that skill, their social skills improved because they're able to react and be more present in the conversations instead of being slower to catch up and unable to read things. That improved auditory processing really benefited them in the social realm. I had one parent tell me, I'm so thankful for this program. What I know before is that my kid didn't have friends and now they do. And just to hear that, when these parents, just the pain of seeing their kids struggle, and not every child with autism is motivated to develop friendships, but I will say the one-on-one with that trainer too, we're consistently working on that social piece of the puzzle. So that's been a beautiful part.
Thank you, Dr. Janissa. Thank you for your time tonight. We appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom with us. And thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you all for your time and attention to this important topic.